Have you ever thought about a seed? Good seeds are little things that, if planted at the right time, the right place, and are tended to, become huge blessings down the road. Whatever seeds you're sowing today, seeds for your future, for your family, for your faith, or for actual food, you're at the right place. Welcome to the Sowing Seed Podcast. Now, here's your host who married way above himself, Matt Miller.
Are you living your life on purpose, or are you just reacting to whatever comes your way? I was on a podcast here. Actually, it was last weekend, and to be honest, I'm drawing a blank on the name of it. But the interview was pretty long. We went a lot deeper into a lot of topics than I normally did, or that we normally had time for. And one of the things that really came out in that podcast, and the host kept referring back to over and over and over again, was the intentionality that we obviously lived our lives. And I guess I never thought of it that way. So he really got me thinking. And so that's why I decided to talk a little bit about this topic today. Are you living intentionally? Are you living on purpose? Or are you just reacting to what's coming at you? Here's what I know, guys. We live in the greatest country on the planet with more opportunity today than ever before. And because of that opportunity, we shouldn't have to put up with or deal with or live through stuff that we don't want to. Now, here's what I mean by that. I think back to my corporate career after I got out of the military. And, well, first off, in the military side of things, our commitments worked as such, and of course Uncle Sam was always in control. And as an instructor pilot starting out in the T-38, because of manning issues and because of personnel issues, etc., they kept us longer in that role than was normal. And then they required us to move on to a new airplane, and with that new airplane brought along an entirely new commitment because of the time, the energy, and the resources that they would commit to training in that. So in essence, they forced all of us to a longer commitment than what some of us might have wanted. Now, thankfully, the Air Force made good on that later, and they allowed some of us to get out early because of that fact. But the reality was, it wasn't about me. It was about the needs of the Air Force. It always was about the needs of the Air Force. My first job out of the military, I worked in the hospital medical industry and had been there about a year and a half, had done pretty well, and was offered a promotion to a specialist position that I was really pretty excited about and thought I would have been great at. I accepted the role, and then after a week or two, when the pay didn't change, I reached out to my manager and found out that he had given me the title, but that there was no pay with it until I hit certain thresholds or standards of performance or whatever. So they're more than willing to give me the title and fill in the role that needed to be filled for the company. But Matt's benefit would be in the future at a future date. When I worked in the advertising space for about a decade, many of you have heard the story about how in the first full year, I was number 2 in the country out of about 750 sales reps. I was at the right place at the right time. I caught the DirecTV and Dish Network wave of direct mail advertising that was occurring, and worked with satellite dealers all around the Houston area, and just crushed it. My quota increased the next year because our entire office had a quota that we had to speak for was 96%, because my boss thought that she could put some extra quota on my back because I had done so well and relieve a little pressure from others in the office. The average quota increase, by the way, was 5 to 10% a year. So I went from being a hero to a zero overnight. My family got put into a really, really bad financial position, and I had to figure it out. I knew, looking at the comp plan, that I wasn't going to be able to work my way out of that situation anytime soon. So that's when I decided to figure out this whole entrepreneurship thing. Many of you have also heard the fact that Robert Kiyosaki and his Rich Dad, Poor Dad were the reason why I ultimately chose to work in vending versus the collecting and selling back of aluminum cans and the selling of books on Amazon before selling on Amazon was cool came about. Here's the thing, guys, and what I really want to drive home with today's episode is you have control. You have the ability, in my opinion, to do just about anything that you want to in this life, in this world, with your family, to raise your kids the way you want to raise them instead of the way you're being told they have to be raised. But you got to decide, you got to know what you want, and then you got to figure out a plan to get you to where you ultimately want to go. Because with that decision that impacted my family negatively, that started us on the course. But I just didn't want to make enough money to replace my job. If I had, then selling books on Amazon would have been perfect. I wanted, ultimately, to have control over time and money. So it took some time to figure that process out. And then it took years of steady and consistent effort to finally get there. You know, another thing that occurred during all of that had a huge impact on what we wanted to do once we finally got out of the corporate world. I don't know how many of you guys remember seeing all the footage years ago for Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans. Well, New Orleans, for those of you that don't know, is literally below sea level. And there are walls built up around the city and dikes to keep the water out. And as long as those dikes exist, then the city can carry on just like any other city in America. But those dikes were breached because of the hurricane, and the entire city flooded. And of course, many people lost their lives. Billions of dollars of property was destroyed, etc. Well, 3 weeks after that, Hurricane Rita came through the Houston area where we were living at the time. And because we had all been fixated on the TV for the prior 3 weeks with Katrina, a hurricane was coming towards Houston, and everybody in the city decided to evacuate. Now, completely different situation. Houston is not below sea level. So the devastation or the impact of Rita, there was no way it was going to be near what it was with Katrina. But we all had that picture in our mind, and everybody decided to evacuate at one time. We always, for holidays, would come up to Stephenville because it's where my wife's, much of her family lived. And so we decided to evacuate from where we lived in Kingwood at the time to Stephenville. It was normally about a 4.5, 5 hour drive on a regular day. Our trip ended up being about 9 or 9.5 hours of bumper to bumper traffic in the heat of the summer. Talk about brutal. My in-laws lived an hour south of us in Friendswood, Texas, near NASA. It took them 32.5 hours to make that same trip because of all the traffic, the people, etc. There was no gas. available anywhere. There was no food or water available anywhere. There was no place to go and use the bathroom anywhere. I mean, talk about a complete and total nightmare. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, Matt, why the heck are you talking about this story? Because it was that week when Amy and I decided we are going to find a way to get out of the city. We're going to find a way to get out of this mass of people and have a simpler life and have a place where we had some acreage to be able to have some things for the kids to do, to learn life skills that they weren't learning in our little rental house in Houston in the middle of the summer when nobody wanted to go outside because of how hot and humid it was. So we intentionally and with purpose started figuring out how to get myself free and where we would ultimately move to. Of course, today we've got just slightly under 6 acres. I call it EIEIO. We're kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We've got access to Fort Worth an hour and a half or so away whenever we want to go into the city. But a traffic jam here is, getting behind a tractor on the way into town. We can see the stars at night, peace and quiet in the evenings. We have a big garden that we have created. We've raised chickens, ducks, geese, rabbits, hogs at various times over the last number of years. And we've all learned a ton. We've learned how to become more self-sufficient. We've learned how to provide for ourselves. And we've learned a lot of very, very valuable life skills that most of us in today's society don't have any clue about. Guys, we decided to do this, and then we put a plan in place to slowly but surely work towards getting here. When we got started, we intentionally wanted our kids to be involved in our business because as a homeschool family, we believe that all of life's experiences have educational value. And so we try to create a learning environment every opportunity we can outside of the normal subjects that most kids end up, taking while they're in school. That intentionality has made them a big part of what we do in business. It's enabled my son, Zane, to be a very accomplished graphic web and app designer today as a junior in college because he was our first graphic designer for our company at 10 years old. It's allowed his sister, Sarah, to do the same. And she's been designing for us now for the last several years and is a sophomore in college. It's allowing our youngest, Rebecca, to learn a lot of things about our office and running an office and about talking to people, working trade shows, developing relationships, selling, etc. Because we intentionally, from the beginning, decided that they were going to be an integral part in what we do so that hopefully they can stand on our shoulders as they get out on their own in the next few years and be that much further ahead in their lives because of the experience that we've provided them in growing up. Now, some of you guys are thinking, you know what? I don't want any part of what you've just shared. I love the city. I don't want to be in the country or whatever. And that's fine. It's your life. It's not mine. But the point I'm trying to make is if you haven't sat down and figured out what you want your life to be, you'll be the same place you are now 5 years later and still just as frustrated, still just as concerned, and still have the same challenges that you do today. I've always heard it said, you've got to know what you want, you need to know when you want it, and you have to be know what you're willing to give up to get it. So sit down with your spouse, or if you're single, sit down on your own and figure out, what do you really want out of this one life that God has given you? If money was no object, if time was no object, if you could truly live what you believe you're on this planet to do, what would you do? What would it be like? Write it down. Next, when do you want it? Put a time frame or a time line on it. You know what? Chances are it's going to take longer than you think, but it's going to take. I mean, you're gonna make no progress towards that goal if you don't write something down. In most projects that we've done, business and otherwise, it's normally taken twice as long, and it's normally taken about twice as much money to ultimately accomplish what it is that we want to accomplish. So just be aware of that, and then get excited about slow and incremental progress each and every day. You know, I started podcasting here a little over 2 years ago. About 2.5 years ago, I started doing interviews on shows. I turn back now, 2.5 years later, and I've produced close to 300 shows myself, and I've been on over 300 other people's shows. Well, that sounds like a huge deal, but all I did was got focused on doing a little bit every day, slowly but surely, getting closer and closer and closer and closer to that goal. And then most importantly, what are you willing to give up? So you can't do all the fun stuff and all the leisure activities and all that you're probably doing now and live intentionally with some pretty aggressive goals, like at least I've talked about in this episode. You're going to have to give some stuff up. You know, if you're a golfer, or if you like hanging out with the guys doing this or that, you may have to put that stuff on the shelf for a while. You may have to turn off some of your TV shows, some of your Netflix marathons, and dedicate even more time to what is going to get you from where you are now to where you want to be. My tool was vending. All of you know that. I started out with a simple gumball machine, and that simple gumball machine today has become a national franchise called School Spirit Vending, soon to be international as we work on expanding into Canada. I look back now a decade since starting SSV, and my mind is blown because most of what's happened was never even on my radar. Being in thousands of schools today, having a franchise team of over 100 families that we get to share life with and to encourage and to help grow and live their dreams. But we just got busy. We figured out what we wanted. We figured out when we wanted it. And we figured out what we were willing to give up along the way. You know, there was a time where I was working my vending route in restaurants and local area businesses around Houston. I was working full-time as an ad executive. I was delivering pizzas for 18 months at Pizza Hut because I needed more seed capital for my business, and because our credit rating was so poor, I couldn't even borrow any money if I wanted to. I was a full-time dad. I was a husband. I was heading up some of the children's ministry at my church. Guys, I was busy. Work-life balance for a while there did not exist, but we were doing it with intention, and because of the growth and the change that we saw, we knew that it was just a matter of time, and all of those additional vending machines would get us to where we would have options, to where I wouldn't have to spend those 40 hours a week working in the advertising space and driving all over Houston on a weekly basis to where I wouldn't have to do some of those other things. Is it worth it? Heck yeah. Now, we're not exactly where we want to be, and we always continue to add to our goals, and we continue to have more and more dreams and aspirations as well. But the reason why I talk through this today, guys, is you have just as much opportunity as the Miller family does. But it's going to take time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And it's going to require living on purpose and doing to life instead of just letting life do to you and your family every day. It's worth it, guys. And you can do it.
Thank you for listening to the Sowing Seed Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a 5-star review in iTunes or your podcast player of choice. So until next time, go plant the seed you need to succeed.